Whether you're just looking to stay warm during a hunt or need maximum concealment, the clothing you wear can make or break a hunt. At MidwayUSA.com, we understand hunting clothing has come a long way with more meticulously crafted camo patterns, advanced scent control technologies, and weatherproof options to withstand the elements. Hunters have to wait until their favorite season, but shouldn't wait on gear, which is why Midway USA offers super fast shipping. When you're ready for your next system, log on to MidwayUSA.com. At Midway USA, we know the AR-15 is one of the most popular rifles in modern American history. Known for its modularity and widespread use, it's often considered essential to any gun collection. The essential things you need to run an AR-15 are usually always in stock during shortages, things like magazines and 5.56 ammo. Whether you're looking to buy a new AR-15 or buy parts for your modern sporting rifle, log on and for just about everything for the outdoors, shop MidwayUSA.com.
The only shooting stick with one-handed trigger pull adjustments has a new way to keep you at the top of your game. The Trigger Stick Apex. Built for sturdy support that adapts to unforgiving terrain with easy adjustments to make your big shots. With our DuraSteady 3-piece carbon leg design and interchangeable rock-solid clamp, nothing tops the Apex. The Trigger Stick Apex, only from Primrose.
If you hunt enough, you learn the truth. What you seek speaks a language and knows it well. That's why every Primos call for everything you hunt is made the right way. We sweat every detail so you get more out of every hunt, and nothing leaves our hand until we know it'll work in yours. Because we don't just make the world's best calls, we speak the language. Primos.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, brought to you by Huntworth. Huntworth gear for all types of weather, all types of terrain, all types of budgets is clothing that just works. Check them out at huntworthgear.com. And definitely be paying attention to Huntworth this coming week, because there is a big announcement coming, and I mean big announcement coming from Huntworth. So definitely check them out and head on over to their website. August 1st, there is a big brand new drop. So definitely check that out. This podcast, getting back into whitetail hunting. Pretty excited for this one to see how it works. Adam Hayes, Team 200, the guy's got the wall to prove it. And talking with him, it was pretty interesting to see how he got into using the moon guide, switching, making that transition kind of as we all do from, just going out killing deer and then saying, okay, I want to hunt a specific buck, or I want to level up and try and shoot a bigger deer this year. Real exciting. And I think it's going to pique some interest. And for the first time, this is someone who, obviously he has the moon guide, but he understands it. He's got something to sell, but at the same time, there's books out there. He tells like where he got the information. It's not something that he, came up with. He just found out that it worked for him, and really had bought in wholeheartedly. And he's the first one that can really explain, the hows and whys to the moon, and how it's not just moon phase, but where it is like the moon with reference to the earth and how close it is and all of that. So really interesting podcast. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one for sure. Got to give a shout out to, all of our partners, all of our sponsors, and, the upcoming Mobile Hunters Expo this weekend in Kalamazoo. So if you guys are going to go out there, definitely check out Genesis 3D, Latitude. The Zinger and Canati guys are going to be there. I think Huntworth is definitely going to be in the one in PA. So if you're over that way, you want to check out some of their new stuff, definitely get over there and check them out as well. But it's going to be a great place to network, to meet new people. to find your next hunting partner, all that stuff. Kind of on the last podcast, how Ben said it's kind of like speed dating for hunters. It's kind of funny, but it really is. You walk in there and everybody's kind of on the same page, and you can kind of get a feel for it. So, we appreciate you guys supporting the sponsors, the partners, everybody that we work with, and the guys that aren't going to be there, support them too. Spartan Forge, Big Shot, and Delta McKenzie, those guys, just incredible. So, anyways, back into the whitetail woods this week. Get that whitetails on the brain. I know you guys are going to enjoy it. As always, thanks for listening. All right, everybody. Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And we are talking to none other than Mr. Team 200 himself, Adam Hayes, today. And we're going to kind of take all the information, all of the ups and downs that he's learned over his 40 plus years of hunting and kind of synthesize it down and see how we can use that to kind of help our guys, just starting out or guys that are trying to level up here, over the course of this season. So, how are you doing today, Adam?
I'm doing really good, man. I appreciate you having me on. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad. I feel like I don't know if I'm maybe like gliding into the season a little bit. Just got back from a Montana spring bear hunt and then right into the Total Archery Challenge. And that was right before that was Memorial Day. So it's been go, 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 go. And now it's into the summer where maybe, I give my wife the summer. I say, whatever you want. But for me, that's now I got to get into the scouting and all the stuff while we're camping. It's going to be a lot of glassing, going to be a lot of driving around, looking for tracks, seeing where the deer are, and maybe getting some trail cameras up, stuff like that. But we talk all the time about getting out there and trying new gear and meeting new people. Well, the time to do that is now. The Mobile Hunters Expo is coming back to Kalamazoo, Michigan, July 26th through the 28th, with Q&A sessions and live seminars from Dan Infalt, Shane Simpson, Jacob Sklenner, Greg Staggs, Brian Johnson, as well as the boys from DIY Hunter, Jeremy Aaron, and Daniel Lemon. You can check out the latest gear from Latitude Outdoors, Beast Gear, Arsenal, Nested Tree Stands, Tethered, Elevate, and many more. There's also a new family zone with a kids archery range, archery tag, just $20 for a day pass or $40 for the whole weekend. Tickets can be purchased at the door or online at the mobilehuntersexpo.com.
Yeah, I got a whole list of stuff I'm trying to get done, and it seems like summer's just flying by already. Season's going to be here before you know it. So,
yeah, really do feel like a little bit behind the eight ball, but I'm, I can't imagine what it's like for you, and I want to get into that. But for me, I'm like a fly by the seat of my pants, like rut hunter. I love the surprise of not knowing a deer is there, and then I guess like because I feel like I'm still learning, and a lot of guys are, like the validation of being right. When you're in a spot that you've never been to before, but it looked good, maybe scouted it or whatever, and then the deer do or somewhat do what you thought they were going to, that level of validation for me. I think that's where I'm kind of at. So I balance, like, I feel like I put in some of the prep work, but never enough to be like, oh, it happened exactly the way that I planned it out in July. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter where you're at or what you're hunting or what your style is. I mean, it all boils down to the same thing. We're trying to predict what an animal is going to do before he ever does it. And when you get that right and it happens the way you predicted it, and you end up, getting an arrow and a big deer or just having an encounter with the deer. I mean, that's what it's all about for me too, as well. Nothing like beating them at their own game.
So where did that start for you? Like when you first started hunting, and it was just talking earlier today with someone about, I probably wasn't, I was probably almost into my 20s before I even understood that people scored deer or whatever. Like the Michigan culture is, it's a 8-point, it's a 10-point. Oh, that's big. Maybe you had like a 20-inch inside spread. Like that was something. But for you, where did this pursuit of when were you, introduced to like hunting big deer more than just going out and hunting as like a culture?
Well, I mean, my dad was a bow hunter. He had me shooting a bow when I was 4 years old. So I've been shooting, my whole life. But I'd say, for the first decade, I started hunting when I was 14. At least the first 10 or 15 years, I struggled. I didn't really know what I was doing, and what I was doing, I was deer hunting. I was just deer hunting. I was just going through the motions, and I was like a sponge back then. Reading everything I could get my hands on, trying to learn, you know, uh, about deer, learn about deer hunting, what was happening during season. I cut my teeth on a lot of the stuff back in the day from North American Whitetail, the Wenzel brothers, Dick Idle, just a lot of those old icons in the industry, just to learn, what it was about and what I needed to do. But it wasn't until probably my mid to late 20s when I decided I was going to try to focus on a specific buck. And I found one in the summer and ended up killing him the first week of season. And when I saw that work and put a good deer on the ground that I went out and found and scouted and watched him and observed him in the summer, I knew I was onto something then. And that's kind of like, really, that was a light bulb moment for me when I switched from just being a deer hunter to hunting specific deer. So I think that was probably the big moment for me, to get me hunting not just specific deer, but going after, more mature bucks.
Okay, so this is probably going to be maybe difficult for you to answer, recall, but prior to that hunt, right? What has anything changed in like the level of happiness or excitement? Because I think what I've said in the past, and I think it kind of comes to true with trail cams and stuff like that, is comparison is the thief of joy, and we see that a lot from guys who say, must be nice. Oh, must be nice. He's got all this land. Must be nice, right? He's able to pass these 5-6-year-old deer, 150s, things where, guys had never seen it before. Do you feel at any point that it was easier, or that you were happier, less stressed when you were just hunting deer versus trying to kill these big deer?
Well, it's definitely more like work than what it used to be, because I have the show, I own the Moon Guide, so I mean I've really created a life out of hunting and a business. And I mean, it's when I just want to grab the bow and go out and sit in a tree, those days are gone. I'm packing all my hunting gear, I'm packing all my camera gear. I got to worry about getting content for sponsors, and it's definitely more like work than it used to be. And I look forward to one of these days when hopefully I can kind of semi-retire, not have to worry about all that stuff. But don't get me wrong, I've created a life that has allowed me to hunt as much as much as anybody. And, everything's got its ups and downs, and everything gets to feel like work now and then, but I still enjoy it. But it definitely changed things for me, doing it for a living. I'd spend a lot of time on the road, and it makes it difficult, for the home family and the wife, and, living out of your truck and hotels and friends, basements and that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's give and take, but, I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Well, I just asked because I feel like, when you were talking about the days of reading North American Whitetail, that's where you're getting your information. When you're, you mentioned the Wenzels, and those guys are, characters in their own right.
Yeah.
But I just feel like today with podcasts like this one and social media, there is maybe like a quicker learning curve, but also I feel like there are guys when they're just starting out, or that they're, haven't made that leap yet, that are kind of missing out on a lot of stuff. They're trying to make it too hard on themselves, and they're not getting to go out and have that fun because they're just chasing inches. The guys that are starting out anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of guys are missing out on what I really enjoyed the most about it, is getting out in the woods and, scouting and learning and figuring these deer out, because it doesn't mean that much to me to go on a guided hunt and an outfitter says, climb in this stand and here's a picture of the deer that's going to come through at 7:30. I mean, it just doesn't do it for me. What I really enjoy about it and what's kept me going for 44 years doing this is finding a specific deer, finding a few specific deer, and really learning, how that deer survives, with the amount of pressure we have these days, and it just, I'm sure, it's just as bad, if not worse in Michigan, but here in Ohio, I mean, there's somebody on every fence. It's not like the old days when you could drive to the soybean fields in the summer and scout bucks and see them in velvet. I mean, it just changed so much, in the last, decade, let alone last 20 or 30 years. That's made it a lot more difficult. Now you got guys like myself who, I don't have a bunch of property, honestly, to hunt. I own 5 acres in Ohio. I actually just gave up a lease that I've had for probably 10 years. But I do have, farms that I've hunted in Illinois and Kansas for the last 20 years where I got really good friends and I've grown an intimate knowledge of those properties. So, I mean, I don't really have, thousands of acres to hunt and multiple deer, to chase every year. It's getting to be the toughest part of the game, not only having a good place to hunt, but, getting these bucks to the age class where, I'm interested in hunting them. But yeah, it's all relative.
So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, and I think it relates across the board, no matter what state you're in or even what stage of hunting you're in. But so for you, it's got to be different. Like you said, there's just not a lot of deer in that age class that you're interested in hunting. And so when you locate one, like let's say, and I, leading into this podcast, I was trying to think of like who else would be in a kind of a situation. And the only thing that comes to mind is these guys from Seek One that are like going around, like specifically finding every bit of information they can listening for any tip on any big deer that they can track down and then try to find a way to hunt.
Yeah.
So for yourself, when you do find one of these deer, because like I say, any of us could locate a deer, we could be driving around and see a deer in a field and we're like, oh my gosh, that's a deer that I want to kill, but it's not on a property that you have access to. How do you go about hunting that deer, finding that deer? Because I think yours is so synthesized down that there's not a whole lot of them that are going to get you excited. So if you're driving around, on the way to work or something, and you take a different back road and you have a deer run in front of the truck that's like, that one's got a chance to be 200 or a booner. What do you do? How do you go about tracking that deer down?
Well, first of all, I should probably mention that, I used to kind of run like those guys did, where I'd be out, anywhere looking for deer, following up on any leads I heard about a big buck, trying to track them down, trying to get permission. And it's just that part of it's gotten so tough that I've pretty much changed gears. And like I said, I'm hunting my home farm in Ohio every year. I've got my farm friends in Kansas and Illinois that I hunt with. And I've kind of switched from going out and trying to find the biggest deer anywhere to what can I do on the properties that I have, that I hunt, and that I've got the intimate knowledge of, not only to create better habitat and to get these deer to, an older age class, as opposed to what I used to do, getting out and trying to find new deer to hunt. Not to say if I saw a giant somewhere, driving down the road, that I wouldn't maybe, do a little investigating and try to get on them if I could, but it's just so tough to do that anymore. Everything's leased up. I mean, you got to pay through the nose to get on properties, and it's just so tough that I've kind of given up that whole game, and I just am happy focusing on the properties that I have, try to make the most of them. I hunted 3 states in a Canadian province last year, never shot a deer. And I had one of my best seasons ever because I'm out there hunting and enjoying it and, learning and watching these bucks grow every year and, gathering as much knowledge as I can for the next season. And yeah, I had a great season last year and never even shot a deer. So. But to answer your question, so what am I going to do if I find a big deer that I want to focus on? Obviously, the first thing you got to do is, obtain permission if you can even do that. So if you've gotten past that point, my routine was always, I wanted to get in there right at the end of the season. I like being able to see what the area looks like without all the cover. I'm looking for main things I was looking for is I want to know where that deer bed's at. I want to know where his core area is, where he goes when he wants to feel safe. And normally that consists of some kind of sanctuary or some kind of thick cover. And it's almost always littered with, a lot of big rubs. That was what I really focused on for the majority of my career, because if you think about it, a big deer in October, he's a homebody. He's not moving much. All he's doing is bedding and feeding, but he's making a lot of rubs in that concentrated area at that time of the year. And that's really kind of been my focus on hunting mature bucks early when they're on a strict feeding pattern, when they're the most predictable they're going to be all year. And if you want to know where they're going to be, in October, that's what they're doing. They're going from bedding to feeding, and they're making a lot of rubs. And when you find those big concentrations of rubs around those core areas, that was kind of what I would focus on first thing to find. And once I found that, the food sources are pretty easy, where a deer's going to be feeding, whether they're, crop fields, whether they're acorn ridges. I mean, the food sources are pretty easy to find. So once you find the bedding area and you know what direction they're heading, that's when you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So,
are you overwhelmed by the hundreds of food plot mixes out there? Well, you are not alone. And Vitalize Seed has developed a program that takes the guesswork out of food plotting. Vitalize makes it simple with their two core mixes, Nitro Boost and Carbon Load. Nitro Boost is their spring-summer food plot mix, and Carbon Load is for planting in the fall, each having a diverse mix of over a dozen seed types that are highly attractive to whitetail. Food plotting made simple. Each mix provides necessary nutrients to the soil, making for better plots each season. This also saves you money by needing less Roundup and fertilizer every year. The 1-2 system simplifies your food plots just how nature intended. And for the more advanced habitat managers, Vitalize also offers a variety of natural amendments with products like their seed feed that offer seeds immediately available minerals ready as soon as they germinate. Make biology work for you. Order now at vitalizeseed.com.
He's going from A to B. How's he getting there? He's got his trails, his rubs, his scrape lines. The big thing for me on that was finding the weak spot. When I quit hunting winds that were good for me and started hunting winds that were good for the buck I was after, that's when I started putting a lot of big deer on the ground consistently. There's going to be somewhere along a buck's pattern, his travel pattern, where he's going from bedding to feeding, where you've got to be able to get within bow range of him while he's using the wind to his advantage, because an older buck, relies on his nose more than anything, So it just dawned on me one day, why am I hunting these spots where the wind's good for me? He's not going to be comfortable to get up and move before dark if the wind's not in his favor. So why not give him the wind? Give him the wind to his advantage so he feels safe, he feels secure. He gets up a little early to move because he's got that wind in his favor, and finding those little spots, and they're normally on some kind of bend or some kind of pinch or an area that forces, movement, but someplace where you can get within shooting distance of him while he feels like he's doing the right thing, got the wind in his favor. He feels safe. And that was what really changed things for me. And when I was, going into new spots, that was really my thing. Find the bedding area, pretty much know where they're going to be feeding. You figure out how they're getting from A to B, and then you look for the weak spot, somewhere where you can take advantage of him while he's got the wind in his favor.
And so when you say that, you say where this buck is bedding, what is your distance or comfort zone? There's guys like Dan Infalt's and the Andres that want to be right on top of this deer in his bed, and they want to, be able to see him stand up or just about be able to shoot to the bed. Do you know where these deer are exactly bedded, or are you on the outskirts of the bedding, just on the bed to food pattern?
Well, I want to know exactly where he's bedding if I can find it, during the off season, obviously. And I know Andre really well. I used to work for Andre and spent a lot of time in the woods and the tree with Andre. And I'll be honest, man, if I was a big buck, that's the last guy in the world I'd want coming after me with a stick and string. He's in a league of his own. But I mean, I'm more concerned about knowing where he beds, not so much like Andre because he wants to set up right on top of him, but I want to be a safe distance. Because in October, like here in Ohio, these bucks might only be bedding 100 yards, 150 yards from their food source. And knowing how close he is and knowing, where he's at, because and I think this is why a lot of guys struggle with October, especially the October lull. It's one of my favorite times of the year to hunt, but a lot of guys shy away from it because they might not understand what's going on, or it's difficult because they say the deer aren't moving. Well, the deer are moving. They're doing pretty much the exact same thing every day. The trick is they're doing it in this little tiny area, Like I said, if he's only moving 150 yards to where he beds the feeds, it's so difficult to get in there without him knowing. So that's why I want to know exactly where he's bedding at, because they're so predictable, so patternable, doing the same thing every day. You've got to know where he's at to either have that stand pre-hung on that little travel corridor or be able to slip in there undetected to kill him. And I've slid into spots and had big deer stand up within, eyesight of me and ended up killing them because I got that close to them. But I like to be, 100, 150 yards from a buck's bed, unlike Andre. He wants to be right on top of him because he's more of a morning hunter than I am. I prefer to try to set up on an evening hunt, and try to kill them 2 or 3 times in the evening. And then if I have to resort as a last resort to kill them in the morning, I'll do that after I've tried it in the evenings a few times. And there's a little bit more to my morning tactics, but I'm more of a, October evening, good wind for the deer, red moon, getting them up a little bit earlier than normal. And if I get a good weather pattern that increases activity on top of that, even better. So that's kind of my thoughts on bedding. I love to know where they're at, but not because I want to be set up right on top of them. I mean, I love to have a stand set up in the bedroom overlooking his bed like Andre does, but I won't do that first thing. I'm going to try to kill him in the evenings first. It's so hard to beat a big buck back into his bed in the morning when he's on a strict feeding pattern. You're really rolling the dice on that.
So you'd mentioned there that you might try it a couple of different times. Are you, obviously, if anybody's listened to anything that any podcasts that you've been on before, you've kind of talked about this before, and it only stands to reason, right? That you're only going to get probably one, there's very little margin for error. Like if you're detected, it's probably the gig is up with these older deer. So if you're saying that you're going to try to kill them a couple times, is that a couple times over the span of the season where all of the factors that are perfect, or is it 3 days in a row if you think you can get away with it? Like how does that play out? There's some guys that say, just get into the rut, get in a funnel, sit there the whole week, and you're going to have an opportunity. Killing a deer from his bed on a pattern is a much different thing if he deviates from, if your access crosses his access when you didn't intend it to, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. October, November are completely different ball games, and they call for different tactics. So in October, when I'm talking about taking a crack at him a few times, like we were talking about earlier, it's all trying to predict what they're going to do before they ever do it. I mean, that's the name of the game. So what I'm looking for is, I found my deer, I've scouted, I know where his weak spot is, I know where I need to be, I know what wind I think he's going to want to feel comfortable. So I try to stack the deck in my favor in this order too, wind, the moon, and the weather. Now, the only reason I put the moon before the weather is because I've killed some of my biggest bucks, when the wind and the moon were perfect, but the weather was crap and the deer shouldn't have been up moving, 85 degrees 2 hours before dark. But, my last big deer I killed in Ohio was not on a good moon night, but that deer was up, good wind, decent weather pattern, making a mistake in daylight, and you got to be aggressive when they do that. So, but what I'm looking for, like I said, a good wind, a good moon. When I get those factors, I'm usually going to dive in when the situation is right in October. You get a couple red moon periods early season, and I'm going to give it a shot. And I won't go into those kill spots until I've got, at least two of those factors lined up and I got the deck stacked in my favor. The only exception I will make, like I said, like my last big deer in Ohio, was if that deer shows up on camera in daylight making a mistake, I'll go in early. It could be a weather pattern. It could be because, crops just changed. Some corn came down, acorns are dropping, whatever. There's so many different factors that can change, a deer's movement. But that's really what I'm focusing on are, the wind and the moon. And then, obviously October, you get a cool front, you get out to hunt, deer are going to be moving. I love evenings where you get a shower in the afternoon and then it clears off and the sun comes out. It's like deer come out of the woodwork on those evenings, but I'll try to kill him, 2 or 3 times in the evenings where everything's lined up, because I think every time you go into that spot and you don't kill him, the game gets tougher each time. A lot of guys don't have the discipline to stay out of those spots. I mean, you do all this work and scouting and finding these deer and figuring out where you need to be to kill them. Only, hey, it's hunting season. I got to hunt. So I got to go in there. I let other guys go in and pressure their areas. And I tell guys all the time, the toughest part of hunting these bigger, more mature bucks is actually not hunting them until you get this deck stacked in your favor. So let your neighbors, let the other guys pressure their areas and maybe push those bucks back out and back into your spot. And I wait for everything to line up. And actually, 8, 9 times out of 10, if I have the patience to wait until everything's lined up and I'll go in, I get them killed the first time. And that's what I'm really trying to do, is I want everything perfect when I go in there and get it done. Because like I said, you keep going in there, you're leaving scent behind. You might not see him, you might not hear him, but chances are he's going to pick up on some scent that you leave behind. He's going to hear you climbing out or walking out after dark. I mean, I really think guys would be blown away on how easily a big buck is patterning them before they get the deer pattern themselves. So I do everything I can, to stay out of these spots. I do all my work outside of season to know where I need to be. There's no reason to go in there. I don't care if season is open or not, unless everything's stacked in my favor. Because like you said, you're not going to get a crack at a big buck, every time you go out, man. It might be once a season, So, I mean, you really got to stack the deck in your favor and, put the odds on your side to get a crack at these older deer. It's it's not easy. If it was, everybody'd be killing big deer all the time and it wouldn't really be any fun.
So you had mentioned a couple things in there, and I want to kind of shift gears, but it all is relative. You were talking about the weather, these fronts, I think more so we feel like we get hampered by that warm weather that you're talking about. But so with weather and moon and all of these things, how would you recommend a guy who's going out of state, say for the first time, approach that, in an area, maybe he's only e-scouted and stuff like that. We don't have these deer, but we're going to, generally speaking, we're going to go like where we have the best opportunities, right? So most guys are going to be in November, first week, second week in November, where you want to be rut hunting. Would you deviate from that, or how would you plan an out-of-state hunt if you were going somewhere new for the first time?
The 1911 is one of the most iconic firearms in history. Designed by John Browning, the 1911 was the standard issue sidearm of the U.S. military from 1911 to 1985. While Colt produced the original, Almost every major firearm company has produced its own version. It's wildly revered for its reliability, crisp trigger, and is still a favorite for all types of shooters. Whether you're looking to buy or build a 1911 and just about everything for guns, log on to midwayusa.com.
Charging your boat battery has never been easier. Our 20, 30, and 40 amp Battery Tender Wave Charge Pro multi-bank chargers safely charge and maintain your boat batteries. The 2, 3, and 4 bank chargers are waterproof, vibration resistant, and will never overcharge your battery. Whether you're on the water, on the road, or in the wild, Battery Tender has you covered. With our variety of battery chargers, jump starters, and solar chargers, Battery Tender can charge and maintain any vehicle's battery. Start with trust. Start with Battery Tender.
Well, if you think about it, there's a handful of factors outside of breeding that are going to increase deer activity. That's the wind, the weather, the moon. You really need to be paying attention to all of them. The moon, though, is the only one that you can predict months or even years in advance. How do you plan a hunt, 3 months or 6 months or 12 months ahead of time by the wind or the weather? I mean, it's impossible. You can't do it. But what you can do is you can make sure that you're there on a week when the moon is good and in your favor, and some guys blow it off and don't pay any attention to it. This is my 44th season, man. I'm still learning stuff every year, and I've learned that you got to pay attention to everything. As soon as you think you got it figured out, you get your ass handed to you. But that moon is the main thing that I'm looking at when I'm planning my out-of-state hunts, months in advance. I want to make sure, because it's all about daylight activity, whether it's October or November, late season. You're not killing deer if they're not up moving. I want to be in the woods when I got my best chance of deer moving during daylight. And that's the moon is the one thing I look at, months or even weeks in advance. So if I'm going out of state, I'm planning my hunt around the moon. I've seen it happen time and time again where I base my hunt on the moon, but I get there and the weather's crap. It happens in Kansas all the time because Kansas is always so hot. But I killed the biggest buck I've ever killed in my life. First week in November, 85 degrees out. No reason for that deer to be up moving 2 hours before dark, but I had a good wind and a good moon. And that's why I tend to lean more towards hunting the moon as opposed to the weather. But I mean, there's days where the weather trumps everything. Like I said, you get a good cold front, you got to be in a tree. It doesn't matter what the moon's doing. And I'm never going to advocate for somebody not to hunt if the moon's bad. But on a night where I might have a marginal wind, but I don't have a good moon or good weather pattern, I'm not going to be sitting at home watching TV. I might be in an observation stand 300 yards away watching that area develop, or on another farm scouting, doing something. I'm not going to be sitting at home. But there's certain things I want in my favor before I'm going to dive into one of my stands. But I mean to kind of get off topic there, but try to get refocused. So out of state hunts, definitely. For years, I've planned my hunts around the moon. November is a little different, and I understand, there's more big deer killed in November. There's more people hunting. Deer are more active. But I actually struggled with November for a long time. Part of it was because I'm focused on a specific animal, and I normally, would be on that deer in October and kill them, and didn't have anything to hunt in November. Then I started moving out to hunting other states and still struggled because I was all about, learning as much as I could about a specific deer, where I needed to be to kill him when he's on a strict feeding pattern. You can't pattern those animals when they're, breeding. So how do you increase your chances in November? Well, when I quit trying to focus on, what phase of the breeding season are they in? Are they seeking? Are they chasing? Are they locked down? Threw all that out the window and just strictly focused on daylight activity. Because if the deer are up moving, the bucks are going to be up moving. The moon's not always good in the morning and the evening. Sometimes it's the middle of the day. If you've got an overhead or underfoot moon in the middle of the day, you need to either forget about your typical morning and evening sets and focus on that window from 10 to 2, or sit all day. It's all about timing when it comes to killing big deer, and timing is all about being in the right place at the right time. You know, you scout, you do all your homework to find the right place, but it does no good if you're not there at the right time. So if that moon's peaking midday and you're hunting, your typical morning and evening sets, you're missing the best opportunity of the day. So you need to adjust where you're hunting. So in November, you get a midday moon, you need to be setting all day or hunting 10 to 2. If you get a good red moon in the morning and the evening, you switch back to your morning or your evening sets. My favorite rut strategy these days, and I killed 3 Boone and Crockett deer 3 years in a row in Kansas doing this, was I would go during the red moon, but I kind of focused on when that moon was peaking more late mornings, because it seems like when you get an overhead or underfoot moon after daylight, say if it's sunrise at 7 o'clock and the moon's peaking at 8, 9, or 10 o'clock, those mornings are your best mornings to catch those big bucks still cruising, whether they're searching for a doe or they're following a doe. It just seems like those have always been the best mornings that I've seen in November, when you get a good moon late morning. Evenings just don't seem to be as, although I killed my best buck in an evening hunt. But for consistent rut action, I really prefer those days where you get a late morning, midday moon, and I'll go in before daylight and sit all day, or I'll sit to like 1 or 2 o'clock and then maybe transition to an evening spot for a field edge in the evening. But that's kind of been my go-to for the rut. But yeah, I'm not planning hunts in November unless I'm looking at the moon, because you can't predict the weather or the wind that far out.
And so let's talk about that moon, because for years and years, I can vividly see, even back in the days of the kerosene lights hissing and all that, and nobody seeing any deer up at our deer camp, and they're saying, well, it's because of the full moon and the deer are just active at night. I'd like you to clarify kind of like what that overhead and underfoot is, and you're not talking necessarily about the moon phase, about whether it's a full moon
Right.
or anything like that. You're talking something completely different, and we've never had anybody on here to be able to, really explain it for us. So can you kind of clarify like what you're talking about when you're talking about depending on the moon itself?
Sure. Yeah, so I know a lot of guys think the moon's got something to do, might have something to do with hunting, but they just don't understand it. So I've done a lot of research on it. I've been following the moon and lunar influences on deer and the moon guide for over 30 years, and have had great success with it. And that's why I bought the moon guide. Jeff Murray, that came out with it in the late 90s, a good friend of mine, passed away from leukemia. And I talked to him about it before he passed, and I told him I wanted to continue his work because I believed in it so much. And I know it's too important information to let die. But basically what you're looking at is every day as the moon orbits the earth, there's 2 times every day where the moon is actually closer to the earth than any other time of the day, and it has the most gravitational pull at those times. And that's your overhead and underfoot moon. It's either straight up or straight down. It's the exact same thing that triggers the tides. This gravitational pull is so strong at those 2 periods of the day that it moves the largest mass on our planet, the oceans. I mean, that's significant shit, and you can't tell me that something that's that powerful does not impact life on this planet. It does. It's been proven. So the key to the moon guide is you only have a handful of days every month where that overhead or underfoot moon peaks at prime time in the morning or the evening, amplifying activity. You with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
So you got 2 times every day, the overhead and underfoot moon. When the moon is the closest, has the most gravitational pull. It gets an hour later each day because obviously it doesn't peak every day at the same time. So as those times start to coincide with sunrise and sunset, most deer want to move at daylight and dark, that gray period, first couple hours, last couple hours of daylight. We're just talking about something that amplifies the movement because it's a natural instinctive push. They can sense it just like they can sense barometric pressure. They can sense storms coming. They can sense this gravitational pull, and it just amplifies activity, just like a good weather pattern does. So that's really what it's all about. And like I said, the moon guide focuses on the handful of days each month where those overhead and underfoot moon hits at prime time, a couple hours, 3 hours before sunrise. Before sunset till about an hour after sunset. Those are those evenings that you got your best chance of catching a big deer making a mistake during daylight. Think about it, a big buck that has survived 4 or 5 hunting seasons, he's kind of figured out the game. He knows it's dangerous to move during daylight. Most times he's going to probably just lay there in his bed until it's dark out to get up and move. But on those evenings, when you've got that added push of that gravitational pull, and it's instinctive, it's Mother Nature, I didn't invent it, pushing those deer to get up and feed when they want to feed anyway, it just amplifies activity just a little bit, and I've read all the deer studies, the radio collar study. I've heard everybody talk about it doesn't prove crap when it comes to the moon. I got my own study I've done on my wall for the last 40 years. I know it works. It's not 100%, nothing is. But when you're focusing on deer movement, you've got to put everything you can to your favor. And I preach that all the time. Stack the deck in your favor. The wind, the weather, the moon. Those are the evenings most of the time where you're going to have your best chance of that buck just getting up. We're talking about just a few minutes early, In October, he might only be moving 100 yards. We're not talking about a big migrational movement pattern you're going to pick up on a radio collar study. We're talking about a big animal in a very specific time frame of the year, getting up just a few minutes early where he's going to walk by your tree right before dark. That's what it's all about to me.
So theoretically, and just on a side, I've heard you talk about this for like the tides and fishing, right? And I remember, like, I'm of the era of like the little Nokia phones that had the snake game on it, and like my old GPS, the Garmin's, and there was always like at some time of the day it showed a fish and a hook, and like this was a good time to fish. And I was thinking, like, how in the hell do they know every day of the year like this is a good day to fish, or I should be fishing at this time or whatever? And I believe that that's what you're talking about, is that same, just that these animals are a little bit more active at these times based on the moon. And so to kind of extrapolate that or push it over to, as long as that moon is peaking overhead or underfoot in a daylight time frame, if you knew this bedding area of this buck and it was midday or something like that, where this deer may already be back in bed, but he's going to get up and theoretically he would be moving around or anxious or whatever in his bedroom, he'd be more active at that time. So as long as it was within daylight hours, you could be hunting this deer in just different areas based on what time that moon was overhead or underfoot, correct?
Well, we give that information on the Moon Guide dial and the app as well, because like I said, those times are changing every day, and you need to adjust where you're hunting at accordingly. So, there's 3 basic areas you're going to be hunting. You're going to be hunting your field edges and food sources. You're going to be hunting your transition zones between bedding and feeding, or you're going to be actually in the bedding areas. So depending on what time that overhead or underfoot moon peaks during the day is going to predict or determine where you need to be at. So, early season, I'm focusing on those evenings where it peaks in the evening, the red moon nights. If I'm going to take a crack at a buck in the morning, I'm going to wait until I get an overhead or underfoot moon after sunrise. Middays are kind of, iffy in October, but if I want to take a crack at a buck in his bedding area, I know a midday, pattern is going on because the moon's peaking in the middle of the day. Well, you got to be in the woods close to his bed in the middle of the day. And those might be the days where you go in super early, get in there 2 hours before daylight and sit until 1 or 2 o'clock. to try to take advantage of that midday movement. And then, like we talked about in November, midday, it's not going to do you any good to be out on the field edges, when they're either up moving around in the bedding areas, or if a buck's traveling from one family group of does to another, you got to catch them on those transition zones between the bedding areas. So we've kind of done a little bit of that homework for you to let you know, where the two peak times are every day, and then pretty much what type of location you need to be at that time, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. So,
Yeah, that it makes a lot of sense when you think about it from that standpoint. Now, outside of the moon, I guess, what do you think is the biggest factor, whether it's tactic or something that you've implemented into your hunting regimen, that's been that's helped you gain the most success outside of, the timing of being in the woods?
Boat Trader, America's largest boating marketplace, offering easy financing and over 100,000 boat listings to choose from. Sell, find, and finance new or used boats on America's largest boating marketplace. Visit BoatTrader.com to get started.
Fishing like a local isn't just about catching fish. It's about connecting with the environment and the people who call it home. It's about hearing the stories and traditions that have been passed down for generations and sharing unforgettable moments with the people you meet along the way. Fishing like a local is having an experience that stays with you forever. And with Fishing Booker, you can experience it too, no matter where you are. Discover your next adventure on Fishing Booker.
I think if you look beyond, the scouting and finding the weak spots and focusing, on stacking the deck in your favor with the wind, the moon, the weather, staying out of those spots, hunting the right, wind that's good for him. I kind of created a scenario for myself that made it even more difficult, because it's like every spot that I'm setting up in, I'm splitting hairs with the wind, I mean, I'm talking, the wind switches, 10, 20 degrees. It could be completely wrong. And I've had spots where I've set up where his trail is directly downwind of me, and I knew I was going to have an arrow in him before he got directly into my wind, because I'm splitting hairs that much. And to be honest, I think other than trail cameras, the Ozonics made a huge difference for me, just because I'm always setting up in a spot where my wind is so marginal, giving a buck the wind to his advantage, and try to be as, everybody tries to be as scent free as possible, but it seems like it's next to impossible to be completely scent free. And, I started using the Ozonics, probably 6 or 7 years ago, and it was not something I even wanted to use. I didn't even really believe in it, until I started using it. Now I won't hunt without it. I'm carrying a 40, 50 pound backpack with all my hunting gear and my filming gear. I don't need to carry anything that's not going to work. So that's made a huge difference and has saved me a bunch, just because of the fact, like I said, I'm constantly testing the wind and pushing my limit with the wind. And that's made a big difference for me personally.
So this is just maybe for my own personal thing, because I haven't followed along with Ozonics that much. How, in that 6 years, how has the technology evolved? Just because I remember like seeing the units the first, I guess when they were first came out, and they seemed like they were huge. Like it was has this, just like everything else, our cell phones are smaller, and I guess they're getting bigger now, but things like that. How big is that unit? Because I think about that with, for 90% of the guys that are listening are, and you hunt mobile as well, but are hunting mobile, you're carrying all your stand sticks, all the stuff on your back every single time. And to add one more thing. So how big is the unit?
I don't know the exact dimensions, and I don't think that they've changed the size in the last few years. I mean, I wasn't using them the first few years they were out, so I don't know if they were bigger back then when they originally came out. I mean, I don't know. I want to say they're maybe, 8 or 9 inches square and maybe 4 inches thick. I mean, they're not huge, but I mean, it's something else to carry. The biggest change they've made in them is the noise, because I know that the first couple of years I used them, they were a little noisy. Not that a deer would hear them, but when you got that thing, sitting right here over your shoulder, constantly blowing, it took away from a little bit of your ability to hear, especially on those dead calm nights. And they've almost eliminated the noise, not 100%, but they've eliminated a huge part of it with the newer units. And that's been the biggest change that I've seen since I've started using them.
Okay. So one of the things I've got written down here is, and listen to some of your other stuff, is, like kind of gear. And, I feel like a lot of people, and I'm guilty of it too, like we'll spend more and more money on different pieces of gear, gimmicks, things. You think, oh yeah, this guy said this is going to be great. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. Every time something new comes out, we decide that that one's going to be better. And we're fixing problems, I think, that we don't have. They're just perceived in our head. Oh, if I could just get something lighter, I would have killed that deer. Like lots of these things don't really matter. So for guys that are skeptical about the Moon Guide or any of that stuff, how does that like fall in there? Because it doesn't seem like it's very expensive compared to a lot of the things that we'll spend money. I mean, heck, you can't go get a meal for you and I at McDonald's for the cost of the Moon Guide, it seems like. So as far as like investment is concerned, like where do you think that falls in? Like, I guess if you had to pick between your Ozonics and the Moon Guide, which one is more important to you? If you said, I'm going to the woods, I'm either going on a bad moon with my Ozonics, or I'm going on a good moon without it. Like, where does it fall, that decision?
No, I wish I could get the kind of money for the Moon Guide that they give for those Ozonics units. But I mean, I tell guys all the time, it's $25, it's the least expensive product you're going to buy all year, but probably the most valuable piece of information you could have, it's the least expensive hunting app out there. And we've got the least expensive nationwide unlimited parcel data on the Moon Guide. I created the Moon Guide app to give me the things that were really important with me. I mean, I've used them all. Most of them have all the stuff that I don't even pay any attention to. I want to know the best days and times, number one. I want to know what the weather is doing and the wind. And, I want some mapping to where if I need to look at some parcel data information, or if I want to mark some trails or my camera locations, stand locations, all that stuff's on there. Very simple to use. Like I said, it's the least expensive app out there, and it's got everything you need. I mean, it's never going to be an Onyx, app, where you can pick from hundreds of different layers and, all that stuff that most guys are never even going to use. But it's got everything as a bow hunter in the Midwest that I really wanted and needed, all it wrapped up into one nice little easy to understand package. And like I said, it's the most affordable app out there. And I wouldn't go a season without paying attention to the moon, but I wouldn't go a season without using my Ozonics. So hard to say which one I would give up. I got the things I count on every year, the things that have worked for me, the things that have helped me be successful. And, I stick to it. And I'm not a big gimmick guy. And I know there's a lot of people out there that think this whole moon thing is hogwash and it might be a gimmick and I'm just trying to make money on it. But I mean, I really bought the company and have invested a lot of money in the app just to share that information with the guys, to help them try to be as successful as they can and as I've been. And that's the one thing that's helped me more than anything in my career, is really paying attention to the moon. It's helped me be a better hunter. It's helped me kill some world-class animals. And like I said, it's not 100%, nothing is. If there's anything definite in hunting, it's that nothing's ever definitive, nothing. But I mean, it's a very important, tool for me. And why not use every resource you can that you have available to you to try to be more successful.
Oh, absolutely. For guys who want some more information or anything on this, I know that there are some books out there that I've heard you reference in the past. Is that how you were introduced to the Moon Guide, or where did you find the information initially, and how long ago was that?
I met Jeff Murray, who invented it back in the late 90s at a trade show. That was before there was any social media, before there was any hunting shows on TV. I mean, there might have been maybe one on ESPN back then. The only thing we had back in the day was, print magazines and the trade shows. And I'd heard about it, read about it. I met Jeff, became really good friends with him, talked to him in depth about it. And he was the one that convinced me, to quit climbing my stand every night, just because it was deer season, and, wait for those special evenings when everything lined up, and helped me kill my first 200-inch deer in 99. And, just had been sold on it ever since. But that's how long I've been following it. That's why I got involved with it. Jeff wrote a tremendous book back in the day, Moonstruck, and it really talks about the science behind it, his theories behind it, why it works. There's a couple of chapters in there that Miles Keller wrote on, his tactics on hunting mature bucks. That's some of the best stuff I've ever read. And that's available at moonguide.com. We reprinted that book, and then I'm almost finished with volume 2. I kind of taken it a step further, and Moonstruck 2, kind of my advanced, tactics for hunting and patterning big deer, and that should be available this fall. But if somebody really wants, to start from scratch, understand, the beginning of it and where it came from, and how, what Jeff talked about, and, what I started with and learned from him, that book is one of the best books I've ever read on not only understanding lunar influences on a big deer, but just hunting big deer in general. And there's some stuff in there about other animals too. I mean, I use the Moon Guide for bear hunting. I use it for elk hunting. I mean, it works for all animals, but it really has worked well for me with bear and elk, big time, not just whitetail.
Interesting. So just going over my notes and some of the things you said, I didn't want to interrupt you earlier on, but you talked about, kind of focusing on your own farms and the habitat and things that you can change, or things that you can control, rather. What do you think is the biggest habitat change that you've made that's had the most impact for, holding big deer, or kind of getting deer to the class of deer that you're trying to harvest?
Like I said, that this is 44 years I've been doing this, and I've hunted everywhere between Ohio and the Edmonton bow zone in Alberta. And it's never ceases to amaze me that no matter where I go, there's one type of cover that holds big bucks more than anything, and that's CRP, set aside, tall grass, weeds. That seems like, man, when you find good CRP cover, that's where you're going to find the mature deer. And I really think there's been what would be a good way to describe it? I think the whole hunting industry, and maybe hunters in general, have kind of gone overboard with the food plots and the QDMA and everything. And people have micromanaged their properties to a point where you've got these beautiful farms, food plots everywhere, just everything a deer needs. And they're attracting, the 98% of the herd that they don't want to kill, and you always hear guys talking about, man, my neighbor's killing a big deer, Well, if you think about it, the biggest bucks in an area, they don't want to be around the other 98% of the deer. They're out on the fringes, I think you're going to see this kind of change, and I've seen it already where, you got 100-acre farm and you got all this food and a little bit of cover. It needs to be the exact opposite. You got to have the most and the best type of cover that you can have with just enough food, you know, because like I said, you're holding the 98% of the deer that you don't want to kill, and the 2% of deer that you do want to hunt don't want to be around the rest of those deer. And they're off somewhere in some little CRP field on your neighbor's farm because he hasn't put in 100 acres of food plots and he wants to be in the best cover, you know? So I think just switching to getting away from all this food and less cover and focusing more on better cover, whether it's CRP or, enhancing the forest, with the, when you go in and hinge cut to make better bedding area cover and that sort of thing. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more guys focusing more on that and not so much on the food. I mean, you got to have food. Don't get me wrong. You got to have it. But I think, if you want to hold the biggest deer, you got to have better cover than your neighbor. So I really have focused more on, the cover more so than the food. But you got to have enough food to make through the end of the season too.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, your history, your wall, all of that. I mean, you must be doing something right. There's got to be something to it. And to say that, to try to focus on doing that and to be successful at it, because everybody and their brothers put in a food plot or done some sort of habitat management. And, I would say it's probably greater than the 99%. It doesn't necessarily always work out that way. So,
yeah,
I couldn't let you go here without, without asking you that. And so one thing we usually ask going into the season is, what bow are you shooting? What's your bow setup?
I'm shooting the Alpha X this year. I've been shooting Hoyt for about 10 years and love their bows, but this new Alpha X has got it's their new aluminum bow. It's got the smoothest draw cycle of any Hoyt I've ever shot. Just love it. I've always been I like a really short bow, so that usually tends to a little bit harsher draw cycle. But this one, they shortened the limbs on it. Just, I don't know. They explained everything they did to me. I can't remember off the top of my head everything they did, but I know shortening the limbs helped a bunch. But I just love how smooth this thing draws. It's shooting great. I backed way off on my poundage this year because I've actually got a torn bicep and a rotator cuff. So I'm going to try to squeak through season before surgery in January. So I really backed off my poundage, and I was really concerned about the draw cycle on the bow this year because they normally are a little harsher than a Matthews from other bows that I've shot and guys I've talked to. But this year, man, what they did, it's just money. I love it.
Awesome. And then, so like, what broadheads do you prefer, arrows and stuff?
I'm a Black Eagle guy. I shoot a 450 grain setup on my whitetail rig, and then a 650 grain setup for elk and bear. The X Impact is my go-to for whitetails, with my weight forward on it, and 100 grain broadhead. It's right at 450. And I think I'm at I want to say I was at 16.5% front of center, which is I think that's right in the sweet spot where you want to be for your FOC. And then I'm an old school fixed head guy. I shoot Radical Archery Designs, and a lot of people have not even heard of them. They've been around forever. I think they've got one of the best fixed blade heads. And I'm not going to get into go down the whole rabbit hole, mechanical versus fixed. I've shot them both. I know nothing works like a mechanical head when they work. I just had a bad experience with one once up in the bow zone. It froze on me, never opened up. And I had a perfect shot on a deer that we were lucky to find because it didn't bleed because the broadhead never opened up. So, I'm just an old school guy. I like the fixed head. I like to know it's going to work because anything that can go wrong goes wrong with me at the worst possible time. So,
yeah, those broadheads have a very traditional style shape. So most of their shapes, they remind me of the Wasp broadhead. So definitely familiar. And I know, a lot of the things that you've said, both with your hunting style, it goes along with our good friend here, Greg Litzinger, and he shoots those Radical broadheads too. So definitely familiar with those.
Yeah, I like the Tycon just because it's got a really long blade on it. So you're doing a lot more cutting, I think, with that than the short, high profile blades. So yeah, just old school, man. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
So if people are interested in the Moon Guide, like where is it available? Is it, and you said it's an app, but there are some old school guys. So do you still sell the wheel and all of that?
Yeah. Yeah, you can go to moonguide.com and you can get the wheel there. You can get the Moonstruck book. We got some apparel. We got links for the App Store and Google Play, which is where the app, is for sale. And then, if anybody has a question, doesn't really understand it, wants some clarification on anything, you can email me at info@moonguide.com. I answer all the emails personally. It might take me a little while to get to it, but I respond to everybody, and then on the website, I've got a lot of blog posts on there, that I've written over the years, a lot of articles on, using the Moon Guide, how it affects animals, how you can use it throughout the season. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. I mean, I've been writing articles for 30 years, so I think I've got almost everything I've ever written in the blogs on moonguide.com. And like I said, man, if somebody's got a question, you can email me. That book, Moonstruck, is great for understanding it. And hopefully I can get this book of mine wrapped up and it'll be ready here this fall and kind of take it to the next level for guys that understand it and want to kind of dive into a little bit more about the advanced, tactics and techniques I've used over the last 30 years.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on here. And, I'm definitely looking forward to not only, checking it out for this season, with some of the dates that I've already got picked out, but I'm excited to go back in the history and like look at some of the deer that I've killed and see like where it lines up with the timing on the Moon Guide. So,
we came up with a free version of the app. So when you download the app, you get a free version that shows you all the historical red moon information. So you can go back 30 years, and that's been the light bulb moment for a lot of guys that were skeptical about it. And that's why I did that, because when you can go back and compare the dates when you've killed your best deer, or when you finally got a daylight picture of that big deer, that you thought was nocturnal, any of that stuff. And you can compare it to the red moon days. And most of the time, like I said, it's a light bulb moment. Guys are like, man, I can't believe how accurate this was, or I've killed all these deer on the red moon or gotten daylight pictures on the red moon. And that's when it really opens up a lot of guys' eyes to, I should have been paying attention to this a long time ago. So that's why it's.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate, again, you coming on, and I hope you have a great season.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the invitation, and good luck this fall for you as well.
Thank you.
All right.
Join me, Chef Jean-Paul Bourgeois, and the whole crew here at Duck Camp Dinners every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV. Through the Blackwater bayous and in the dark Louisiana night floats a duck camp, alive with the sounds of swamp pop and the smells of Cajun cooking. From the Mississippi Delta in Venice to the Cajun prairies of the Southwest, me and the Duck Camp Dinners crew will be hunting and eating it all. This is Duck Camp Dinner. Join me, Chef Jean-Paul Bourgeois, and the whole crew every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.